Alrighty, we are here with one of my favorite podcast people, and I'll call you one of my favorite people as well. New title, Harry Morton, founder and CEO of Lower Street. Just an absolutely, pioneering, game-changing company in the podcast space, especially for brands. But we'll talk all sorts of things, podcasting inside and out. Harry, thank you so much for joining. This is a real treat. Been looking forward to catching up for a while. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's like humid here in Somerset, in England, so I'm a little bit clammy, but otherwise very comfortable and well. Thank you.
Good. Well, we have a clammy Harry on our hands. Mm-hmm. Everybody's worst
That's
nightmare.
Definitely TMI, but there you go. You got it.
We made it 40 seconds into the interview before TMI was pulled up, so appreciate that. But I have to share a little embarrassing story on my part where I got a little clammy. Well, first of all, I shout out my clients Ann and April from Forthright People. They interviewed you on their show Marketing Smarts years ago, 2022, which is now known as Strategic Counsel by Forthright Business. So that was the first time I heard your name and worked on that episode. And I was like, wow, this guy's pretty brilliant. I should pay attention to him. Then you and I actually met for the first time at Podcast Movement in Denver in 2023.
Yep.
And I just remember I went to some of your sessions and it was great, but I remember it was like heading back from I was heading back from a happy hour one time. We just kind of passed in the lobby and I introduced myself again and said, hey, and I don't remember what I said, but I remember it was exactly after a happy hour and I was kind of feeling it a little bit. And I don't know what I did. I don't think it was that bad. I just remember the next morning being like, wow, Harry probably thinks I'm a drunken idiot. So I apologized on LinkedIn, which I had never apologized on LinkedIn before. That's something else. So thanks for bearing with me there.
Absolutely. This is great. You made an absolute fool of it. No, I'm kidding. You didn't. You were fine. But yeah, no, it was good meeting you.
Yeah, back at you. So it's amazing this interview is happening. But so before we get to Lower Street, I find it really interesting about your background, and kind of looking at some of the similarities and differences for like my journey in podcast production so far. And I'm somebody who's like totally self-taught in the audio and podcasting world. And I've always wondered, because sometimes people when they start working with us are like, wait a second. So like you never studied, audio engineering or podcasting or anything like that. I went to school for marketing entrepreneurship, so very different, obviously some overlap. For your standpoint, Bath Spa University, which is the coolest name ever. You did a lot of work in music technology, studying audio engineering as well. I've always wondered, like, what are those classes like? Like, what do you learn when you actually go to study that side of the audio world?
Yeah, it's kind of it's like a technical degree. It's like an engineering-y kind of degree. So you're kind of we learned how to build certain kinds of software with a program called Max MSP, so we could make our own like audio processing tools, right through to how to operate a big mixing desk and record an album for a band kind of thing. So and then a ton of like post-production work, so sound for TV, Foley, all these sorts of things. So it was kind of, to be honest, it was just like what I enjoyed doing. So I went to school to do that because it was fun. In retrospect, I think the self-taught route is every bit as good for getting the skills that you need. I didn't leave university with like an incredibly employable degree in my backpack. I probably just spent a ton of money just like having fun in a studio, which I don't regret for that reason because it was fun. But it was an interesting kind of way to learn. But I've learned just as much outside of it, being a nerd on the internet. So I think that's equally valid.
Well, credit to you for going to school to study something that you thought would be fun, because I think so many of us get in the trap of like, all right, let's study something that's gonna get us a job and make us money. So you kind of like from the get-go are against the status quo, and I imagine it brushed up on your audio engineering skills as well. But what's like a class or like a project you did from that experience that you'd say is formational or foundational to you to this day?
Yeah, good one. I mean, the most fun ones were the ones where we were just given the broadest brief, and it was just like, you have to, like, here's a sample, you have to take this sample and make a track out of it and do it in this studio and showcase your ability to use all the gear. And so you're just like, cool, I'll show that I know how to use a compressor and all the EQ, and I'm going to use like ribbon microphones and these things and that it was that kind of like, I guess, without being able to conjure up a very specific project that was that I got a lot from, it was more just like the freedom to go make whatever you want, that creativity thing. Like that's really what's been big for me for forever. Like I'm a dreamer. I like just like coming up with ideas and experimenting and trying stuff out. So I'd say that aspect for sure is what stuck with me.
Is that a personality trait that you've always had, that dreamer?
Massively, yeah. I spend a lot of time thinking and imagining and doodling, and so that's kind of that's where my brain likes to live, you know.
So speaking of dreaming, let's get to a street of the lower variety, as it's called, Lower Street Media. Really, really cool. Branded podcast agency, which if you look at some of your numbers now, it's like, you've worked on over 100 shows. You've got tens of millions of downloads across them. Really, really some of the biggest names as far as companies as well as individuals now that you've worked with. So I'm just here to hype you up, and I'm going to sign off now. So thanks, Harry. No, but a really, really cool thing that you've dreamt of and built. What was it in the first place that in this audio and creativity world got you focused on, like, there's something about this podcast route I really like?
Yeah, it was just, so I'd come from, I went to school for audio engineering, like we said. I went to work in a studio, a post-production facility in Soho in central London, and working for this company that did sound for TV adverts. So we were doing like Colgate toothpaste and like a bunch of banks and all this kind of stuff, like sound for TV spots. I was a very junior engineer, so I didn't, lay my hands on anything that made the TV, but I did kind of learn about the business behind what was going on there, purely by being in it and observing it. And I did that for a couple of years, absolutely hated it, ended up getting fired because I messed up. There was a brand called Domestos here in the UK, which is like a bleach product, and they had this like bunch of adverts in the kind of late noughties, early teens, which were these like, I guess like Chicago gangster bacteria that lived inside your toilet, and you'd use Domestos to kill them and eradicate them, and we did all the sound for that, and it was like a fun thing. But my job was to like back up all of the recordings that would happen in those sessions so that it could be saved and brought back for the next time that the client came in. And I stuffed that up one day. All of those recordings were lost. Hours of like client material was gone, and they had to get them in again. And they were like, "Harry, you're gone. See you later." And I was like, "Okay, sweet." And so I left, and then, I thought that was like this just earth-shatteringly awful thing, and I thought I was trying to figure out like where I was going to go next, like how I was going to continue this sort of career path, and I ended up actually just pivoting and working in marketing and sales. So I got a sales gig, worked that for 6 or 7, actually not that specific gig, but like sales in general for 6 or 7 years. And it was in that period that I really started to understand business. Like I'd known from a very young age, similar to you, I guess, doing entrepreneurship at university, I'd kind of known from a very young age, like 14-ish probably, that I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to be a business owner and run stuff. And I'd had all these sort of dreams of like web development agencies and all these kinds of things in the past. But then by working in sales for a long time, I'd really kind of cut my teeth on like how to sell, how to speak to enterprise people, how to deal with marketers, like what they care about, what they're trying to achieve, all these sorts of things. And through those years, I did a bunch of traveling and worked abroad and did a bunch of stuff. But I was really spending from probably 2010 onwards, so just like all of my time listening to podcasts to educate myself on how to do all this stuff, and like what business I was going to start and how I would go about it technically and tactically. And it was sort of through that process and that period that the kind of light bulb slowly went off of like, hey, I'm educating myself in podcasting. I know how to speak to brands. I understand audio. And and at this time I was like really deep into listening to the startup podcast from Gimlet Media as they were sort of being built and then bought by Spotify. And that was like hugely inspiring to me. And I was like, I looked around outside of Gimlet and I was like, I have something to offer here. Like, and there's, you're young and you're probably there's too much hubris kicking around, a bit of ego. And like, I can do this. Like these guys aren't doing that great of a job. I can figure this out. And so, it was through that period that I was like, okay, cool. I know I want to do my thing. I want to start an agency. I have this skill set. I can see an opportunity here. And so that's kind of what started me on this path. And it was just me in my bedroom in my underpants to begin with, like emailing people going, hey, can I help you with your podcast? And it's slowly built. And here we are 9 years later.
Well, at least you were wearing underpants.
Sometimes, yeah.
This is just already the TMI episode, but I'm shook because first of all, I've never heard of bacteria described as Chicago gangsters, so that's a little intimidating to begin with.
Look them up on YouTube. They're classics.
You might get a knock at the door after that. But it's really an inspiring journey of knowing that, like you said, like a lot of us and many of us who tune into this podcast have that kind of hankering from an early age of like, I'd love to create something myself. And so it's always really cool when that becomes a reality. But obviously it's a very, very scary thing to do. What scary rhyming with Harry, couldn't resist. What was like your first step, I guess, to actually turn that into a real company?
It was really an organic process, to be honest. I think I always intended from the very beginning for it to be a company. Like when I started it, I decided to create a company, not just be a sole trader as it's labeled here in the UK, just like a freelancer basically. I set up a company entity.
Trader like TRAD. Okay,
Exactly.
I took that as TRAITO. I'm like, that's kind
no,
of funny.
Yeah, not a traitor. Although who knows? But no, a trader.
Ask the client. No, I'm just kidding.
A sole trader is just like an independent freelance person basically here in the UK. But I set it up very specifically from the beginning as a company with the intention of growing a team. And I would say, when I sent emails from my bedroom in my underpants, I would say we in the emails, like, we do this for clients and stuff. And it was very much just me. And it was kind of a fake it till you make it kind of deal in the first few years there.
You and your underpants, though. I'll give you
credit
for that.
Absolutely. And my wife, who like was sitting beside me when I was sending all of those emails. So so yeah, it was really an organic growth from there. So that it was intentional in the sense I want to create a company, but I didn't necessarily have the dreams of I want it to be 35 people, global team doing all this kind of like that wasn't the vision back then. It was just to create something, and I didn't know what that was going to look like yet. And as I say, here we are. Yeah,
so it's pretty staggering. I mean, mention to drop some of the brands that you've worked with. There's like PepsiCo, there's Booking.com, Sam Parr, Money-wise is like an amazing show you're doing right now.
Thanks.
And a team of over 30 people around the world. I think that's something that like a lot of new entrepreneurs would love to have one day, but it doesn't even quite seem realistic if you look too far ahead. It's like start with yourself and maybe one team member at a time. But how what do you think, like in those early days, created momentum that you said it was so organic? Like, what do you think was a good strategy you had that actually turned things positive right away or early
For
on?
sure. Well, firstly, so I'm going to answer that. I also just want to say, reflect on what you just said there, is like, again, I didn't see this as the part. Like I wasn't like, in 5 years time I'm going to have a massive team. It was just like, I'm going to keep working at this, and then it's just this incremental thing, and you wake up 9 years later and it's this massive organization. Well, massive again by my stat, it's all relative, isn't it? But so again, it wasn't like a grand vision, and it doesn't feel like this meteoric thing. It's just something that's built slowly over time by not giving up. And I really put like a huge amount of whatever we could label as success down to just keeping going. Because so much of what we'll talk about of what worked growth wise, some of that didn't kick in for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like there are contacts you made 5 years ago that come back around, and those are the things that contribute to the huge leap forward that allows you to hire that person or do that thing. So it's really about planting seeds and having the faith that they'll come around and sticking around long enough to see them grow, like without sounding super corny. But So yeah, what worked early doors? I mean, like the very beginning, I started with cold email outreach. I would just be emailing podcasters one to one, saying, "Hey, I heard your podcast. Sounds great, but here's how I think it could be better. Would you like some help?" And that got me the first handful of clients. I was also like looking on Upwork in the early days, like really like base level stuff. And then that kind of developed slowly developed. I mean, and I mean slowly. Like it was really, really slow in the first kind of couple of years. I was working I was working as a waiter at the evenings and weekends to pay the bills. Like it was not a sexy time. Although I did do some fun waitering gigs. I got to wait tables at Buckingham Palace and kind of funky places like this because of the company I work for. So that was kind of fun. But it wasn't.
I hope you put on some more clothes by that point.
I'd figured that out. Even a waistcoat. It was very fancy. So I was I was not making a lot of money for a long period of time. But so that slowly built up a book of business, and that began to sort of get a bit of referral stuff going and things like this. But it was once I'd had a couple of real B2B brand clients that I was really seeing, firstly, the amount of folks entering the space and starting agencies, and the amount of competition was growing. And so there was just a real like danger of racing to the bottom in terms of having to compete on price. And that wasn't interesting to me. And but also there was the Gimlet Medias at the very sort of top of the industry, and then Pacific Content came along, and there was a couple of others, and Pushkin and like a bunch of others that were sort of doing that high tier work. But it felt like there was a big gap between like podcast editing services and these like high level things. And I figured that there was an opportunity to kind of step into that enterprise role, because no one was really doing a good job of that. So once I had enough clients on the roster that felt like that was the direction of travel, I really made a conscious effort to double down on positioning myself at the time as premium. Subsequently, it's like we don't position ourselves as premium. We're just like, we are just enterprise level. That's kind of what we are. But like back then I was like, I just want to really set a stall out of like, this is the place you come to get really high quality work. And invested a lot of money in branding ourselves and looking really great, making the website look solid. I mean, I would argue it massively needs a refresh now, but 6 or 7 years ago, it looked sweet. So I would say that's the big pivotal moment, is when I said, okay, I'm just going to focus on premium. I'm going to focus on brands, not creators. We're going to focus on predominantly B2B. And it was through that positioning and the work that we did on SEO and all this kind of stuff that then really kind of helped us to grow into that sort of position.
So brands I think it's like a super exciting space to be in, but that's like a totally different world when you think about it, as far as like individual creators and, for even like influencers starting podcasts, things like that. I think corporate brands, there's a lot more people involved. There's, potentially much higher budgets for marketing, but also a lot more layers of approvals typically that need to go through new endeavors like this. How did you start to actually win some of these, what now we would call, big name brands, big name clients, when you were like starting out like that?
I think the British accent helps. People trust the British accent. They think this guy wears glasses.
Don't reveal all your secrets, Harry.
Yeah. This. I mean, for all you like Midwestern agency owners out there, just put on a British accent. It works wonders.
Ohio here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's hard to say. I think that I presented myself in the right way. I put together a coherent pitch. I think I established a level of credibility and trust that people would leap. And like I say, this has been a really slow and iterative thing. So it was really just like, for example, I got an inbound inquiry from a company here in the UK, an IT software solutions company or an IT services company. We worked with them for a couple of seasons, and their digital marketing lead, became a great client. We got to know each other really well. We became friends. We sort of worked together on that show, and it did really great. He then moved positions into a much larger enterprise organization and brought us with him. And so he was like, well, this worked well over here. Let's do it over there. And that was one of the notches on the sort of high quality client growth trajectory. And so it's kind of like, once you've got one, then the others look at that logo on your website and they're like, well, okay, well, if they trust them, then they must be doing something right. And it's sort of a slow build. So it's not like I woke up one morning and like had a bunch of blue chip clients looking to work with us. It was just really like proving yourself, going one step further over months and months and months of time.
And how much did you polish your British accent through that process?
Look, do you know what? I've had it dialed for some years now, so what can I say? It just comes naturally at this point,
Yeah, second nature for you.
Wow. Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned the team of 35 around the world, and that's one of the really, really interesting things in the podcast production space, but also just when you're thinking about building out a business in general. Like if you get to the point that you're able to add more members to the team, how did you think about that in terms of let's start off with like, how did you make it work financially, of like, okay, we can actually bring some others on now, and look, now it's 35.
Yeah, honestly, every hire that I've made that's been pivotal to the growth of the company has been deeply uncomfortable to hire. So as in financially, I'm like, ooh, I better back this up. So I've always, from the very beginning, I've been like, how do I get away from doing the work? Even though like editing audio is what I'm really good at, and it's kind of sad that I don't get to do the thing that I am good at anymore, and really haven't for like most of the time of the business at this point. I was always like, I don't want to be doing this. I want to be focusing on like, how do we market ourselves and sell? How do I go out there and like sell more cool stuff? So it meant that I had to find really capable people, trust them, and pay them well enough that they would stick around, and then just kind of like put them in their seat and get out of the way and go and focus on the next thing. And so in all of those cases, like I didn't feel like I could afford it. It was just sort of stumping up the courage to take the leap. And so that was hiring a first audio editor. Back when I was hiring show notes writers, that was kind of hiring some freelance show notes writers. That was like a slightly easier thing to do because it was more flexible, but like editors was like a full-time thing, and that was much scarier. And then one of the big pivotal hires I made 4 or 5 years ago now, I really should know, but I can't remember if it's 4 or 5, was to hire Adam, our COO. And like when I brought him on, I was paying him more than I was earning. Like it was super scary. But like I just met him and I thought, this is the perfect fit for what we need right now. And it was hiring probably 6 months ahead of where we were, but I just had to take the bet that like, okay, I'm going to hire this person. He's going to figure all of this operational stuff out that is taking a ton of my time, and then I'm going to go then work on sales and marketing, and that's going to grow us to the point that justifies his existence as a role. And I took that bet, and it paid off, and here he is 5 years later, and he's been a wonderful addition to the team. So it's like, yeah, so the answer to your question is, I never knew that it was the right time to make these hires. I just had to do them or not do them, and like the choice is either stay where you are and kind of go around in circles a bit because you can't sell more because you can't back it up, and you're busy doing the work itself, so you can't go out there and find more business. You just got to kind of take the leap and go, do I believe there's more business out there if all I was doing was selling? If the answer is yes, then okay, I'm going to hire that person today, and then the heat, the fire's under my feet now to go figure out where we get the next deal from.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a business owner, is just like once you start to get clients and consistent book of business like that, it's like all of a sudden when there's so much on your plate, it's like hard to imagine like, oh, like I could be in a position where I'm not doing this day-to-day stuff some more, and I could be in a totally different role like that. For you, how did you get yourself to finally like stop doing what you love and that doing the audio editing?
I kind of necessity, honestly. It was just like I had to sell more stuff, and I didn't have the time to be sitting there in Pro Tools because it's time-consuming work. It's like skilled, slow work, and you got to sit there for like hours at a time editing an episode. And every minute that you're doing that edit, you're not sending emails, responding to clients, sending invoices, signing contracts, pounding the pavement. It's just so it was just a forcing function of like I got to get out there and do more stuff, so I better find someone trustworthy and then trust them.
It's funny, I always think about that, of like, it's kind of crazy those of us that get into the editing and the production space, because I remember like early on when I was launching this podcast, we had an early guest, Tom Casano from Sure Oak, who was just like, when you're doing a podcast, one of the things that could save a bunch of time is like to hire somebody else to edit and to like offload that, and think how many hours you save when it's off your plate. And that at the time I had not started any production work, for any other clients or anything like that. So I was like, oh yeah, that's probably a good idea. It probably saves a lot of time. And now fast forward, and my entire life is focused on editing podcasts for other, like the production side for other people. And so it's kind of like I took his advice and then totally flipped it on his head. And you did the same thing as well. It's like, we're kind of like a crazy breed of people that sign up to do something or have a team that does something that is so time consuming for others. But obviously it's proof that this is like a necessary thing. And it's just like when you're saving time for people, it's a wonderful thing to build a business around.
Yep.
I think with the makeup of your team, it's really interesting as well. Because that's probably changed a lot over the years. Like when you think about podcast editing, podcast production, obviously hiring editors and a team from that creative standpoint comes kind of the first natural thought there. But what would you say is like an area of the podcasting world that in recent years you've got somebody or maybe a couple of people on your team that specialize in, that has been like a game changer that wasn't there before?
Well, the obvious example for us right now is video people. We didn't have dedicated video staff until last year, and now that's a side of the business that I think we're going to be growing significantly. So that for sure has changed. The other stuff that's changed is, I guess I would just say, structure of the team. So before, it used to be that you would have a producer who would be working hand in hand with the client. They'd be writing, scripting, planning, researching, editing the content, and then we'd have audio folks, so sound designers and stuff, that do the sort of the audio editing. But the producer would be that link with the client and doing all of the creative work. And then eventually we reached a point where we had enough producers where we really started to need some structure to manage that production team. And so we've created we've got producers, we've got senior producers, but then we introduced executive producers. And the executive producers kind of oversee a small team of producers, manage a bunch of those projects. They also produce shows themselves, but their predominant task is like making sure that the production team is doing great work and is resourced and is all that kind of stuff. So that kind of operational layer and that professionalizing layer, I guess, allows you to continue to grow that production team without having to be like ultra hands-on and having a million direct reports and all this kind of stuff. And honestly, just like hamstring them, because they're all like super talented people and they need other producers who are super talented to manage them. And then what you need, or what we need, what I can't say one needs it as like it's a universal truth, but a very common role then is like a production manager. And so our production manager, Elizabeth, she oversees all of the sort of contracts and the staffing and resourcing of each of the shows to make sure everything's running on time, contracts are being adhered to, everyone's time is being managed appropriately. And so she's the kind of link between like ops and the creative side of production. So that's been really pivotal. And then we've set up an entire kind of client success team, which involves audience development, so the growth of the podcast. So we obviously have the team that makes the shows, but then we all have the team that like helps get the audience in and listenership for those shows, and that comes under kind of under client success. So we've got the production team, we've got production management, we've got client success, and then of course we've got like accounting and operations and that side of stuff as well, and the sales team and marketing, of course. But those are the things I think that have absolutely developed over time. We hired all it was before was me and a bunch of producers and audio editors, and then we needed to hire some exec producers, and then the exec producers were going, whoa, there's so much stuff going on, we need like a production manager to manage that. So we put that in, and then along the way, in tandem with all of that, we're like, our clients need to be more successful, we need to make sure their shows are growing, so we need a team to handle audience development. And so it's all kind of been added on and on and on over time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to grow. And I love it seems like the key inflection points in your business is whenever you go, whoa. I think that's whenever that happens, you're like, wait a second, this is scary, but maybe we should do it.
Yeah, it's always scary, yeah.
Looking back now, which again, you've almost a decade in business now, so you've got a great run. It's tough for any business to stay around for multiple years, seemingly these days, but also still probably what you would consider in the early days of Lower Street. What would you say is like the biggest concept or approach overall that you think has driven the growth of your company?
I think it is a relentless focus on quality and depth versus efficiency and price. It allows us to work with the best, most interesting clients, which allows us to do the best work, which is in turn our own marketing. But also it allows us to hire the best talent because they get to work on interesting stuff and they get to be fulfilled in the things they create. And I get to be proud of the work that we put out as a company. And I think that's what's really important. That just ultimately drives us. We're a team of creatives. Like, no one wants to come and work for a podcast company to churn out the very best talent out there that produces the very best podcasts. Don't want to be turning up and just like churning out stuff. They want to be making good things. And so by us really focusing in on making good things, it means they're motivated. That means they do great work. That means clients are happy. That means we get better and more clients. And so for me, it's really, really easy to focus on how do I make the bottom line better, or how do I just maximize my profit? How do I survive this next quarter? Because it's rough. and that can force us to make decisions that maybe don't lend themselves to that sort of quality piece, and that's kind of really been it for us, I think. And a massive dose of luck, like just huge luck. Like truly, there's no. I think I would say the vast majority of companies that have stuck around for any period of time, I think they would attribute a lot of their quote unquote success to luck, and I certainly wouldn't exclude myself from that.
Yeah, we hear it all the time from founders on this show of how big a piece luck plays, and if you kind of zoom out, it's like, let's say you were born 20 years earlier, like at the age you were at, like you wouldn't have started this company, like podcasting wasn't around yet.
Exactly.
And so it's like really funny to think about that. Let's switch it up a bit, because we've talked a lot of the inside baseball or inside podcasting. So let's talk outside baseball and outside podcasting.
Sure.
Great sport, my first love. What I want to talk some of the trends in podcasting, but also what's just kind of changed over the years, because it's, like any medium or thing in the marketing world, I would say podcasting changes all the time, and there's always so many hot takes on, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. And I think with your company and a lot of the shows on your roster, like I think you've been able to actually get to the point where like the shows are very successful. They're building an audience, they're targeted to the right audience, which that podcast market fit, as we'll call it, is like really, really tough to do, and it's becoming harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
So first things here, like, what do you think is like the key thing, like number one thing that you need to get right in order to have a quote unquote successful podcast?
You need to have a reason to exist. You need to be different from what's already out there. You need to be obsessed with the listener. So you asked about things that we've done differently that have potentially contributed to our growth over time. And I sort of said I focused on the sort of premiumness of it. Well, that was also tied at the same time. Everyone, when I was building the business, was making interview-based podcasts, and the vast majority of shows are that. They're just two people talking, and that's great. We're having one right now, and it's awesome.
I was going to say I totally hate interview. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So that's awesome. But when I was looking around, I was like, well, like everyone's doing these interview-style shows. What we should really be pushing are the shows that I love to listen to. And for me at the time, it was like Reply All and Startup by Gimlet Media, and I was a Gimlet fanboy, and obviously Serial and This American Life and all this kind of stuff. I was like really into proper storytelling. I was like, well, that not very few brands are really separating from the pack by making narrative-driven shows versus just two people talking shows. So that was a big part of the focus. That was kind of how I would quantify premium or high quality, right? Was this kind of storytelling. But the answer to this question is, like, back then that was also the way to differentiate. So if you're a brand and you're like, okay, cool, there's like a million different interview shows out there, all on the subject of, I don't know, crypto at the time. That was hot in 2020. How are we going to separate our show from all the other ones that are out there? Well, the answer in some cases can be just the format, the way it's presented, making a higher quality thing that stands apart from everything else that's out there, because that's going to find listeners that actually give a damn and want to listen. And so that was the answer then. Then we've pivoted into like video first shows, and one of the ways that we can really stand apart is by making a really high quality video show, and we're probably in that transition now, but we're also in that part where everyone thinks they want a video show. So now we've got to figure out, okay, how do we make the higher quality video show? And so I say, laser focus on the listener and obsession with the listener. We really have to think, who do we want to reach? Who are they? What other shows are they already listening to and engaging with? What do they care about? What's their lifestyle? What purpose should this show serve them such that it would be of high value to them and they're going to keep coming back? The answer is probably not going to be the same as all the other shows that are out there already. The answer is probably going to be something unique and different and interesting. And I think very few people still are willing to stick their neck out and do something that feels a bit risky by not following the path well trodden. And unfortunately, the path well trodden is well trodden. You're safe. You're not going to look like an idiot if you do that. But you're also going to be lost in a sea of noise. And so really the answer, I think, is truly understanding and obsessing over your listener, figuring out what they're already listening to and make something that is not like what else is already out there, because then you have something that's marketable, something that's differentiated, something that's interesting, frankly, something that's fun to make. So that's how I would answer that.
What about on the audience side? It just like audience growth has always been tough in the podcasting world, but I feel like it's more and more tough every year as there's more and more podcasts, and the traditional marketing, and then we'll call them now traditional social media platforms, are changing so much in terms of reach and impressions and everything from that standpoint. What is an example of a way that like you guys have, tried out that's like a tried and true way of actually growing your podcast audience?
Yeah, I mean, it is getting harder for sure. There's no question. There is more competition. The channels are more saturated. People are more, best practice is a thing now. Like everyone is aware of like the things they should do. And so the bar is raised, and it makes it harder. And the sort of, it's the rich get richer. It's kind of like the bigger podcasts get bigger because they rise to the top. They're featured in all the places. And so it gets harder and harder to compete there. I think really nothing much has changed in that. The advice I've always given is that the instinct is to go and plaster everything over social media. That's where people are hanging out. That's what we should do to promote. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. That is important and useful. Social media is a great place to find new content. But when we're in social media mode, when we're on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, we are looking for bite-sized, short-form, one-click the like button content. We're not looking necessarily to engage with a 40-minute podcast episode. And so making that context switch is really hard. And so I've always said to people, really what we want to do is focus on the channels where people are already engaging with the content, and that's listening to other podcasts. They're already in that mode and they're ready for discovering new stuff. And so we want to think about how do we partner with other podcasts that are serving the same audience? How do we use the platforms that people are finding their podcasts through to get in front of them, whether that's through like editorial coverage on things like Apple and New and Noteworthy, which we've all obsessed over for decades, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, all these different platforms. How do we use them to get our show in front of the relevant people? But really, how do we trade promotions with other podcasters? How do we go out there and be a guest on other shows in relevant spaces? All that kind of stuff, I think, is really the bread and butter of podcast growth, and that's not changed. Nothing's different there. It's getting harder and more competitive, more expensive, but that's what it is. I think there's definitely some strategic things that you can do that are more tactical and more growth hacky, shall we say. I think building an email newsletter around your podcast is something that a bunch of people have been doing for a really long time. I don't think that many people are doing it very well. And I think that can be a good growth lever, because it's like, if I own my audience in the audio, how do I also own them via email and then keep them engaged and keep them reminded of the content and coming back to it? So things like that as well. But honestly, I would just think about the channel itself and how do you get in front of podcast listeners where they're at.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, the whole social media thing, because you're right. I think so many of us spend so much time on social media sharing it out, and it is important, but I always thought the same way. Like, you have to think of it as kind of like a branding and awareness play. It's not
exactly
like no one is on Instagram and is going to be, oh, I'm going to drop this, or on TikTok and seeing a bunch of 5-second videos and then being like, oh, okay, let's stop doing this and pay attention to an hour-long audio or video podcast.
I think you got to think about it more about we're getting content from the podcast to feed our social content. It's not we're putting this thing on social to get people over to our podcast. It's like it's the other way. It's like flipping the other way around.
Yeah. That's a great way of thinking about it. All right, video is something that so this podcast I started in 2018, and I think at the time, and the next year I started like just a small service for my family business to help edit and produce podcasts for others. And at the time, it was like kind of weird if you were to talk about video and podcasting. Mm-hmm. And as I started to get more clients, it was just like the clients at the start, it was like vast majority were audio, and then the 1-2%, whatever small amount would consider video. Now it's like with new potential clients, vast majority want to do video as well. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing with yours as well. I know you guys have, beefed up your video production capabilities, and obviously from your set, for those watching, like, it looks awesome on your standpoint as well. Thanks for being here in your underwear, Harry. But with video at the time of this recording, what's like the biggest thing to keep in mind if you're gonna go the video podcast, or has historically called vodcast route, if we dare?
Sure. Well, I think firstly, it's important to just own the fact that, like, no one's really knows the answer yet. Like, everyone's talking about video, but I don't think anyone's figured it. Like, no one's figured it out. We're still working out what video means for podcasting. So that means there's no rules, and so there is no right answer. So I have opinions, but I don't know the answers, and I would encourage everybody to think for themselves what video podcasting means and how they want that to affect their particular show. I think the main things from my perspective are that yes, there is an opportunity in video, and that's a great thing. Not every show has to have video. There is plenty of success that could be had just in audio. And so just because everyone's talking about it doesn't mean that you need to be there. And you might actually find that you spend a lot of time and energy on trying to make your show work for video, but then it doesn't really add much of a lift for all of the time and energy and money you're putting into it. It actually doesn't necessarily help you in what you're trying to achieve, which is reach more people and impact more people. So I would say, think about, again, audience centricity. Who is that audience member you're trying to reach? Where are they hanging out? Do they want a video version of the show? If yes, great. If not, that's also great. Like, it's fine. You can still put your audio on YouTube for the minority of folks that like to just listen to their shows on YouTube. There's no reason not to be there, but you don't have to put a ton of focus on, like, what's my video strategy. I think that the biggest fear I have about video podcasting is that I don't want it to turn every show into a Talking Heads podcast, because like I said before, we went from interview shows. We've managed to kind of get enough going that there's like a bunch of different interesting formats that are like exciting and work so well in audio, but then create huge complexities when it comes to creating the video version of that. And so what we could be tempted to do is then simplify our podcast to fit in the side of a mold of, like, this is easy to produce for video and audio, and that is a loss to the listener, in my view, a loss to the audience. So I think it's important to think through what impact that production capability will actually have on your show. And I think it's important, again, especially if we're starting a new show, is the perfect opportunity is to think, okay, again, audience obsession. Who are we trying to reach? Why should they care? Where are they hanging out? That will inform, should we make a video, is video core to our strategy? In which case we're making a video first podcast, which we're then going to figure out the audio strategy for. Or are we going to make a really high quality audio program and then try to figure out what's the video strategy for this? Because, like, it's very hard for both to be really good. Like, you kind of need to pick your lane in a way. It's not at the expense of all other creative decisions, but it does mean that, like, okay, we really want to focus on video, so therefore we're going to make some creative decisions that might sort of inhibit our ability to do some of the things we might have done in audio, but that's fine because that's where we want to focus, and vice versa. And so I think what I don't want people to do is get caught up in the thing and go, I've got a show on podcast, a podcast, and so I'm just going to slap 2 talking heads on it, put it on YouTube, and away we go. We've done video. That's not really going to provide much of a lift. It's not a great video experience, and it might make our audio show become worse because we're focusing on that video stuff. So there's my sort of loose video rant. I do think that there's a ton of opportunity here. There's like a ton of like stuff that unlocks. We've been working on stuff with Moneywise, and our producer Jackie's been doing a few episodes where she's gone out into the field and recorded stuff in situ. Like she did an episode on private jets for this show Moneywise that we work on, and so she went to an airport, and that made it really interesting both to listen to and to watch, because it was like, okay, I have a sense of place. Like this adds to the experience because I can see where she's at, and also when you hear it on the audio only, you hear where she's at, and that's cool. Like that's a good thing. It gives it a time and a place versus just like me on yet another riverside, or Squadcast as we happen to be here today, Max. So I think there's absolutely a ton of like really creative and interesting things that it brings or kind of pushes us towards, which is wonderful. But I would just encourage everyone not to get swept up in video at the expense of all else, because it might actually just make the show worse.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective there. And I think what's so addicting and exciting for exciting, just made up a word, for so many of us that are adopting video as well, is just plain and simple, like the discoverability potential on YouTube is just so much more visible there than like it is on the audio platforms. And the recommended like there's so many ways that people can find you on the internet and on YouTube, which has become more difficult with traditional podcasting. So I think that's really
it is exciting. But what I would say there, I'm sorry to cut you off, but what I would say there is that like this is true. There is a bunch of opportunity for discoverability, but what we found, at least with MoneyWise, again, so this is the podcast that I host and we work on, it's very, very difficult to get access to that discoverability piece unless you're making content that's really focused on YouTube, because YouTube wants YouTube content. And so, for example, the things that really impact how your show performs on YouTube is how many people do you maintain for the first 5 minutes or 30 seconds? Like, what's that retention rate? Do people click on this, watch it, and then stick around? And then do they click on another video and stick on the platform? Because if they do those things, then YouTube rewards your video, because it's like, great, I want shows that increase. YouTube cares about how long can I keep users on this website? And so if your content does that, awesome. So that means you've got to kind of really think about that when you're making the show. That means you've got to be really cognizant of that fact. So if you're just doing an interview show and you slap up your talking heads, yes, in theory, you are giving yourself access to this discoverability piece. But the thing is, your content isn't built for that algorithm. And so it's not going to get rewarded by it. And so, great, it's exciting. But in order to really benefit from the thing that you're excited about, you've actually got to lean in super hard. And then it makes you focus. And again, I'm finding this with MoneyWise. We focus so heavily on the YouTube to try and get that thing going that we're really making a YouTube show where we rip the audio and put it on a podcast. And that's a very different beast. So it's an interesting trade-off you're making.
Well, speaking of interesting trade-offs, let's trade off the final few minutes of your time here with a daunting rapid-fire Q&A. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get wild. What's the first podcast that you ever listened to?
The Ricky Gervais podcast.
Oh, wow. Yeah. What? I know you co-own a cow. What's the name of your cow?
Black. There's a bunch, but
cows. Sorry, plural.
Cows, plural. There's 7. I won't like Blackjack's the one we most recently ate. Sorry, listeners, viewers.
And how about the other 6? No, I'm just kidding.
There's a lot of them.
What is that? All right. What's your one line for? What's like the one line answer for the difference between brands that see like a business impact with their podcast and those who don't?
Like I said, the ones that lean in and are brave enough to do something that's outside of everything else that they're seeing their competitors do.
And then last one, there's a lot of what's it called? Prophetizing, predicting, pontificating what the future of podcasting might look like. Most people are focused on what the next 5-10 years will look like, so I'm just going to throw you a total curveball. What will podcasts look like in the year 2125?
In the year 2125, I mean, God, like, it'll all be hooked to our brains via Neuralink, surely. We won't be listening to anything. It'll all just be like telepathically kind of transmitted. Yeah, I have no idea. I think I do, for better or worse, I do think the video thing is going to have a tremendous impact on the podcast space, and it's up to us as the podcast industry to decide to what extent that changes. Do we want to really fight for what's awesome about audio? And I absolutely love and adore and would stand up for audio forever. I love video and I'm excited by it, but I don't want it to be, like I said before, I don't want those trade-offs we have to make to be at the expense of great audio storytelling and just listening to wonderful stories. So I'm excited by what YouTube's bringing to the table, but I hope we can all rally around audio storytelling and make sure that is alive and well in another 10, 20, 30, 100 years' time.
Well, I'm excited for the Subconscious podcast. But Harry, thank you so much. You're a huge inspiration in the space, and I really appreciate your time and also just like following you online. Like you are so over the top generous and helpful with like what you've learned as a company and through now you're hosting MoneyWise, and there's so many great case studies and webinars you guys do. So really appreciate you coming on. If anybody wants to learn more, they can check out lowerstreet.co or check out Harry Morton on LinkedIn, as well as at Podcast Harry on X or Twitter. Is there anything else you want to shout out, Harry?
Nope, you got it. That's awesome. Thanks, Max. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, back at you. Last thing, final thoughts. Literally could be a few words if you want. Send us home. What is just kind of words of wisdom, final things to live by?
Words of buy a cow. No,
I knew how did I know it was going to be cow related?
No, I the only thing I would say business wise, like I think I mentioned it earlier, is that any success, quote unquote, that we've experienced is by virtue of not giving up and sticking around. And I would just tell everybody that just stick at it, because the folks that stick at it are the ones that will still be standing when everybody else gives up. And that's the best advice I could give. But I don't know any more than anybody else, so you take that advice with a massive pinch of salt.
Bring on the bongos!